You're listening to the CyberWire Network, powered by N2K.
Hi there. Sam Eisenberg from N2K here, inviting you to join me for a brand new monthly segment that you can find right here in the CyberWire Daily called Learning Layer. Cybersecurity is a constantly changing field, and you need to evolve with it. That means you'll need to acquire new skills and new knowledge. Join me as we learn how to learn in the cybersecurity space. On Learning Layer, we'll be chatting about everything from how to improve technical skills to certification exam prep to brain science. Happy learning. I'll see you in the layer.
Hello, dear listeners. Today I want to share and recommend a podcast that I recently became a fan of, and I think it's worth your time, and you should check it out. The show is called Compiler, and it's produced by the folks at Red Hat. The subtitle for the show is Simplifying Tech for Tomorrow's IT Leaders, and the show certainly does that, but it does a lot more. I'm getting ahead of myself. The reason Compiler has earned a regular spot on my podcast playlist is the genuine, authentic curiosity of the show's hosts, Angela Andrews and Brent Simoneau. Angela and Brent are your guides for journeys into all sorts of tech topics that are relevant to folks in cybersecurity and IT, and they do it in a way that's casual and conversational, but also smart and concise. This is a show that respects your time while feeding your curiosity. And Compiler has something for everyone. Doesn't matter if you're just getting started in your tech career or if you're a seasoned pro. I'm willing to bet that you'll find the Compiler podcast both entertaining and informative. So check it out. It's the Compiler podcast from Red Hat. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts. The DPRK's Lazarus Group exploits ManageEngine issues. A data breach at Kroll is traced to SIM swapping. Unusually destructive ransomware hits CloudNordic. The spawn of LockBit. Polish trains are disrupted by hacktivists. Rick Howard looks at the MITRE attack framework. Our guests are Andrew Hammond and Erin Dietrick from the International Spy Museum. And influence laundering as a long-term disinformation tactic. I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire Intel briefing for Monday, August 28th, 2023. Researchers at Cisco Talos are closely following DPRK activity and say North Korea's Lazarus Group has exploited a ManageEngine service desk vulnerability to target an internet backbone infrastructure provider in Europe and healthcare entities in the U.S. and Europe. The threat actor used the vulnerability to deploy the recently discovered QuiteRat malware, which the researchers note has many of the same capabilities as Lazarus Group's better-known MagicRat malware, but its file size is significantly smaller. The researchers add, this substantial difference in size is due to Lazarus Group incorporating only a handful of required Qt libraries into QuiteRat, as opposed to MagicRat, in which they embedded the entire Qt framework. So, a little smaller, a little more unobtrusive, but still out there actively collecting. SIM swapping is a problem for consumer fraud, but it also afflicts enterprises. Security consultancy Kroll, while serving as a claims agent in 3 bankruptcies, has disclosed a data breach affecting information related to bankruptcy claims by several cryptocurrency trading firms, including FTX. An attacker gained access to the data after performing a SIM swapping attack via T-Mobile against a Kroll employee. Kroll said in a statement, Specifically, T-Mobile, without any authority from or contact with Kroll or its employee, transferred that employee's phone number to the threat actor's phone at their request. As a result, it appears the threat actor gained access to certain files containing personal information of bankruptcy claims in the matters of BlockFi, FTX, and Genesis. Immediate actions were taken to secure the 3 affected accounts. Affected individuals have been notified by email. We are cooperating with the FBI and a full investigation is underway. We have no evidence to suggest other Kroll systems or accounts were impacted. Krebs on Security warns that as a result of the breach, people who had financial ties to BlockFi, FTX, or Genesis now face increased risk of becoming targets of SIM swapping and phishing attacks themselves. So, breaches breed opportunities for social engineering. HackRead reports that Danish cloud provider CloudNordic was hit by a ransomware attack on August 18th that caused a complete shutdown of the company's servers and infrastructure and led to complete data loss for most of its customers. TechTarget quotes the company as saying, "As we cannot and do not want to meet the financial demands of the criminal hackers for ransom, CloudNordic's IT team and external experts have been working hard to get an overview of the damage and what was possible to recreate. Unfortunately, it has proved impossible to recreate more data, and the majority of our customers have thus lost all data with us. This applies to everyone we have not contacted at this time." CloudNordic notes that while the attackers attempted to steal customer data, there is no evidence that they were successful in doing so, but the loss of data has been extensive. Kaspersky has published an updated analysis of the LockBit ransomware builder that leaked in September 2022. The leaked builder allowed many different threat actors to create their own flavors of ransomware based on LockBit. Various gangs have used their versions of the builder to develop or at least propose new ransomware strains. Over Friday night and into Saturday morning, a cyber attack halted trains near the Polish city of Szczecin. An emergency radio signal was compromised and used to stop about 20 trains. Service was restored within a matter of hours. Both freight and passenger trains were affected. The BBC reports that Poland's internal security service ABW is investigating the incident. There's widespread speculation that the incident was the work of Russian hacktivist auxiliaries. Evidence for that attribution is circumstantial but compelling. Polish officials note that the signals were interspersed with recordings of Russia's national anthem and a speech by President Vladimir Putin. Reuters reports that a senior Polish security official said, "For the moment, we are ruling nothing out. We know that for some months there have been attempts to destabilize the Polish state. Such attempts have been undertaken by the Russian Federation in conjunction with Belarus." According to Wired, the emergency stop signal was transmitted over a legacy radio frequency system that lacks either authentication or encryption. Anyone with the right equipment can trigger an emergency stop by sending a series of 3 acoustic tones at the right frequency. The biggest difficulty such a hacker might face is getting physically close enough for their signal to be in range. Some have poo-pooed the notion that this is a cyber attack, but it might be useful to think of it as a very old-school kind of cyber attack. In fact, it's a throwback hack of a throwback system. Among the original hackers, before people thought of hacking or talked about cybersecurity, were the phone freaks. Starting in the late 1960s, they discovered that sending the right tone into a telephone let them make free long-distance phone calls, which back then were pricey. You needed a 2600 Hz tone to engage the old Bell System's long-distance service, and you could use cheap musical toys to do that. A whistle offered as a prize in boxes of Cap'n Crunch cereal did it, if you covered up the right hole before blowing. Some people can even sing that high. Or so I've been told. Finally, you've heard of money laundering, taking cash and disguising where it came from. The same kind of thing can be done with disinformation. Call it influence laundering. The New York Times describes the organization of a Russian influence campaign that concentrates on the use of front groups to cultivate Western influencers who can be counted on to disseminate and amplify the Russian government's chosen narratives. The Russian services are playing a long game. According to The Times, the newly declassified U.S. analysis looks at how Russian intelligence services, in particularly the Federal Security Service, or FSB, have been secretly using allies inside nominally independent organizations to spread propaganda and cultivate ties with rising leaders, efforts that are intended to play out over long periods of time. It's in some respects a familiar exercise in public diplomacy, but it differs from most of these in its use of front organizations and the cultivation of co-optees and what used to be called during the Cold War, useful idiots. A representative front organization is a non-governmental organization, creative diplomacy. The organization bills itself as a public diplomacy program for aspiring leaders to facilitate dialogue with Russia. Creative diplomacy denies any association with the Russian government. The U.S. government thinks otherwise. CNN notes that the narratives prominently feature the official Russian line on the war against Ukraine. The Ukrainians are Nazis, NATO is behind the war, Russia is defending its interests and protecting oppressed ethnic Russians, and so on. But they also extend to other areas of Russian interest, notably the ongoing civil conflict in Syria. One of the lines pushed about Syria accuses the White Helmets, a volunteer humanitarian relief organization operating in opposition-controlled Syrian territory, of trafficking in human organs and of faking chemical attacks by the Assad regime's armed forces. All of this is hooey, of course, but it's less obviously hooey if it's washed through someone who's not an employee of the FSB, or RT for that matter. It's an old tactic and goes back long before cyberspace was so much as a gleam in DARPA's eye. Coming up after the break, Rick Howard looks at the MITRE attack framework. Our guests are Andrew Hammond and Erin Dietrick from the International Spy Museum. Stay with us. Meet Mimecast. They're in the business of taking companies at risk of cyber attack and putting them at ease. Picture this. It's Monday morning. You're cruising through hundreds of unread emails. Your impulse to promptly click, download, or respond could be a prompt to launch a cyber attack. An email address is a direct digital path to the mind, the machine, and the data of every person in your organization. It needs better security. I know what you're thinking. I'm all set. I have Microsoft 365 protection, Dave. It might not be enough. That's where Mimecast comes in. They've developed a system that fortifies your email security and reduces costs, risks, and complexities, enabling you and your business to work protected. So before you click your next email, visit mimecast.com to start your free 30-day trial. Struggling to secure on-prem apps with modern identity? Don't worry, you're not alone. Join industry leaders from Fortune 500 organizations to secure your apps on any cloud with any IDP, regardless of your environment's complexity. Meet Strata's identity orchestration platform, Mavericks. Say goodbye to the headaches of app refactoring and legacy tech debt. With identity orchestration, you can modernize legacy apps to use MFA or passwordless authentication in a few weeks, migrate from one IDP to another, and so much more without changing the app. No matter your IAM use case, Strata extends the value of your current identity investments. And the best part? You can try it for free today. Visit strata.io/cyberwire to share your biggest identity challenge, and they'll hook you up with a complimentary pair of AirPods Pro. Don't miss out. Visit strata.io/cyberwire. That's strata.io/cyberwire. Washington, D.C. is known for its world-class museums, and one of my favorites is the International Spy Museum. Andrew Hammond is a historian and curator at the Spy Museum and host of their podcast, Spycast, which is part of the N2K and CyberWire family of shows. Andrew Hammond joins me along with his producer, Erin Dietrick. They're celebrating 600 episodes of Spycast.
So the show got its start back in 2006, and I think the first host was our former executive director, late executive director, Peter Ernest, who was a former CIA case officer and a bit of a CIA legend. He was Robert Gates's spokesman at one point. So he ran the podcast for a while, and he obviously came at it from more of an operations point of view, and then it seemed to transfer over to the historians. So then we had Mark Stout, one of my predecessors, a really good guy, former CIA officer, analyst and historian. He done it for a bit, and then Vince Houghton done it for quite a while, maybe 6 years or so. And then, like you say, I took over 3 years ago. 3 years ago at the end of this month, I think, actually. So yeah, we're still going strong, and I think that touches on an important point. You know, obviously me and Erin hope to be here for quite some time, but as the museum's podcast, it's not our podcast. So we're just trying to do what we can to lift it up and make it better, and then hand it over to somebody at some point in the future to take forward again.
Erin, I have to say, you all sent over some statistics here, and this podcast has been running for 17 years. In my mind, that's about as long as it's possible for a podcast to have been running. You all were early adopters here. Did you start producing the podcast when you were just a child?
Yes, yes. When I was just, what would I have been in 2006? 7 years old.
There you go.
I started producing Spycast. No, yeah, it's actually, I mean, and when I came on the team, I did a bit of research on sort of the landscape of podcasts in the United States and beyond. And really 2006 is like prehistoric era in terms of podcasting. So it's really quite a pleasure to be working on something that's been going on for 17 years. Certainly, Andrew and I can't take credit for all of that on our own. There have been 3 previous hosts and plenty of other folks who have contributed to the success of the podcast as well.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about what you have coming up here. I mean, with episode 600, you're kicking off a couple of months of some special guests here. You've got 5 weeks of Spy Chiefs.
Yeah, Erin and I have been working our socks off to get a blockbuster lineup for this coming fall. So at the end of this month, episode 600 is going to be former CIA director and 4-star general David Petraeus. So that's how we kick off 5 weeks on Spy Chiefs. And then we have, for the first time ever, a former Kenyan intelligence chief. He's going to be speaking about Kenyan intelligence. We have Ireland's Garda, their intelligence guy, top intelligence guy. He's going to be speaking. I think that's a first as well. We're going to have a former senior Indian intelligence officer on. So India's research and analysis wing, their CIA, he's going to come on. And then we finish off with Tish Long, who was actually the first female intelligence agency director in American history. Of course, there's been many more since then, but she was the first. So those are those 5 weeks. And then in October, we have 5 weeks looking at Israeli intelligence. So we do a deep dive into one country. So the Spy Chiefs is global. Then we focus in and we look at Israel. We look at the history of Israeli intelligence. We have a former Israeli national security advisor on, former Mossad officer. We have someone talking about the Yom Kippur War, which is 50 years ago, this coming October. We have someone coming on to talk about Israel's top secret, ultra elite special forces, Sayeret Matkal. And then finishing off, we have a former head of intelligence for the Mossad. So Erin and I have been working on this for quite some time, and we're quite pleased and proud, I think, to be doing this. Would you agree?
I agree 100%. Very proud.
Yeah. Andrew, you are a historian yourself, and I'm curious, having all of these conversations with these top people from all over the world, how has that informed your approach to the work that you do there at the Spy Museum?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think one of the amazing things about the podcast is that every week, Erin and I get to have a one-to-one tutorial with somebody that really knows what the heck they're talking about. So it's a great way for us to broaden and deepen our education, and that affects everything else that we do, whether that be putting on exhibitions, whether that be doing other work with the youth education team. So all of these conversations inform everything that we do here. If you want to think about it, it's a way for us to constantly stay on top of ongoing professional education. We constantly have our ideas oxygenated by the outside world, by people that were historians or that were in the intelligence business and so forth. So it informs it in all kinds of ways, and I can't think of a better way to just stay on top of the field than to host a podcast and get people in to talk about it.
How about you, Erin? A lot of your work is behind the scenes, but what sort of things have you taken away here?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny. I've been at the Spy Museum now for about 2 years. When I started here, I was in the guest services department, which I stood in the museum pretty much all day. And when I started, I couldn't tell you the first thing about spying or intelligence. And in fact, this is a point of contention between me and many people who work here, but I had never seen a James Bond movie before starting here at the Spy Museum.
For shame.
I know. And the first one that I watched was the newest one, No Time to Die, which is just another point of contention. But so I started, I really didn't know anything. And now it's been almost a year of me working with Andrew on the podcast. And boy, I just feel like I have gotten a masterclass in intelligence and espionage. There's no better way to learn about it, like Andrew said, than to sit down and listen to all of these professional folks who are from so many different areas of the intelligence community, talk about their experience, talk about what happened in the past, talk about what's going to happen in the future. I feel like I'm somewhat of an expert now. I certainly couldn't call myself an intelligence historian by any means, but, maybe a couple steps below that. A couple steps above the average person on the street who's seen a couple James Bond movies. So, yeah, it's been great. It's been really great.
Sometimes I honestly feel like I'm a scuba diver in the most fascinating and also bewildering coral reef in the world, and I just get to go around and explore it. And sometimes it's where all the pretty fish live, and then other times it's where the really ugly, scary eels live. But it's always colourful and it's always interesting.
All right. Well, Andrew Hammond and Erin Dietrick are the duo behind the Spycast from the International Spy Museum, which, of course, is hosted right here on our CyberWire network. Andrew and Erin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Dave.
Our thanks to Andrew Hammond and Erin Dietrick from the International Spy Museum for joining us. You can check out Spycast right here on the CyberWire network. It is always my pleasure to welcome back to the show Rick Howard. He is the CyberWire's Chief Security Officer and also our Chief Analyst. Rick, welcome back.
Hey, Dave.
It's hard to believe, but you have just published the last episode of CSO Perspectives, your podcast for this season. Lucky 13.
Lucky 13.
What do you got in store for us, my friend?
Well, yes, indeed, sir. Okay, this season, we've talked about Moneyball for workforce development, first principle strategies with the AWS CISO, CJ Moses, and the current state of zero trust, quantum computing, and DDoS protection. And it's appropriate that this season's last episode is a Rick the Toolman episode, because we've been doing a lot of these kinds of episodes in 2023, basically explaining the tools that best help security leaders pursue their chosen first principle strategies. For this last episode of the season, we're taking a look at a couple of tools and one best practice guide designed to make the MITRE attack framework more useful to the average security operations center.
I know you are a big fan of the MITRE attack framework. In fact, I want to say the very first conversation you and I ever had at RSA, you were back at Palo Alto.
Yeah.
You were at Palo Alto, and it was the first time we met, and you told me all about the MITRE attack framework in that interview. That's my recollection. What prompted this discussion here, Rick? Why turn back and emphasize this one again?
Well, in January this year, CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, working with MITRE, released an update to their original paper called Best Practices for MITRE Attack Mapping. And they released a new tool called the Decider, which I just love, by the way, the Decider.
Yeah.
And
sounds like something from either a Despicable Me movie or something that Dr. Doofenshmirtz would make.
I'm the Decider.
The Decider, yeah.
So the tool is supposed to help analysts map incoming cyber intelligence reports to MITRE attack.
So what does that exactly mean when we say that we're mapping to the MITRE attack? What is that?
Yeah, so you may have noticed that you report the news every day that as a community, we have no shortage of cyber threat intelligence reports to read through on any particular day, from security vendors seeking to make a name for themselves, from government agencies like the FBI and CISA trying to share actionable intelligence to the InfoSec community, and, from our own internal intelligence teams trying to make sense of their own collected telemetry. When SOC analysts transform that raw intelligence into something useful, something where they can later design and deploy countermeasures designed to defeat known adversary behavior, the first step of that process is mapping that raw intelligence to the intrusion kill chain using the MITRE attack framework as a guide. So for this episode, we walk through the CISA Best Practices white paper and talk about how to use the MITRE tool, the Decider, in that kind of work.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to that. That is part of CSO Perspectives. That is part of CyberWire Pro, which you can find on our website, thecyberwire.com. Rick Howard, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
Tired of cybersecurity mega conferences? MWise is different. With a focused agenda and targeted problem solving, MWise is where security's best go to get better. From September 18th through the 20th in Washington, D.C., you'll join a special community of security's sharpest minds, hear perspectives you might not get anywhere else, and reach a new level of mastery that'll prepare you for what's next. Register early and save at mwise.mandiant.com/conf23. That's mwise.mandiant.com/CONF23. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. Don't forget to check out the Grumpy Old Geeks podcast, where I join Jason and Brian on their show for a lively discussion of the latest news every week. You can find Grumpy Old Geeks where all the fine podcasts are listed. We'd love to know what you think of this podcast. You can email us at cyberwire@n2k.com. Your feedback helps us ensure we're delivering the information and insights that help keep you a step ahead in the rapidly changing world of cybersecurity. We're privileged that N2K and podcasts like the CyberWire are part of the daily intelligence routine of many of the most influential leaders and operators in the public and private sector, as well as the critical security teams supporting the Fortune 500 and many of the world's preeminent intelligence and law enforcement agencies. N2K Strategic Workforce Intelligence optimizes the value of your biggest investment, your people. We make you smarter about your team while making your team smarter. Learn more at n2k.com. This episode was produced by Liz Irvin and senior producer Jennifer Iben. Our mixer is Trey Hester with original music by Elliot Peltzman. The show was written by our editorial staff. Our executive editor is Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow.